Helldivers 2. It's a game that has dominated the online stratosphere lately, and has served as a tuber game, a meme game on TikTok, and a RP game for those that still cry about Rising Storm Vietnam not getting a sequel. In other words, it's one of those games that has its fair share of phallus fondling, and yet I haven't seen anyone actually talk about it as a game. Sure, it's got big explosions, believable world building, and has gotten over the worst of its issues, the server queue. But beneath that spray-painted gold and democratic exterior, is it a game that makes you want to dive straight into it? Now, if I had a nickel for every time a niche indie game got a sequel that put it on the map and completely changed the visuals, I would only have 2 nickels. But that's weird that it happened twice. However, much like Risk of Rain 2, this game absolutely blows the original out of the water, both in popularity and in gameplay. Helldivers 2 takes what worked in the original, such as the stratagem system, reinforcement mechanic, and dynamic mission system, and elevates it so that the gameplay matches the graphics. After making such a statement, I realized I haven't touched the original Helldivers in about... I guess it's been a while. For the life of me, I remember this game being insanely hard to younger me, and yet looking at my achievements, I have some that seem nigh impossible to do in Helldivers 2. Well, I can't review this properly until I dive back in, so fuck it. Looking at the original game, there's some obvious changes that stand out. Firstly, the game is played from a top-down perspective and controls much like a twin-stick shooter with aiming, twisting your character's body to wherever the gun is pointed. Another massive difference is that weapons can be upgraded rather than coming stock. Each weapon has anywhere from 2 to 4 upgrades that affect things such as damage, fire rate, ammo capacity, and more. The upgrade system in this game is far more prevalent than in Helldivers 2. Not only can you make your guns but that also extends to your stratagems. You can make the personal shield generator go from the shields in the Halo books to the shields in the games, or just add more DACA to your strafing runs. Comparatively, Helldivers 2's upgrades are only for the stratagems or other non-player systems, such as steering your hellpod or tearing off your pilot's legs to make them fly slightly faster. Apparently Managed Democracy includes them getting to decide how many extremities you're allowed to have. Better yet, why do we need research samples for this? We are researching glue and packing peanuts. Is this like Warhammer, where old technology is lost, so these are somehow superior to crafting a suit of armor out of the hull of a ship? Although, I guess that isn't very good either, considering Helldivers die faster than the Yasuo in mid after he acquires boots. All that to say that Helldivers 2 does not lean into the upgrades as nearly as hard as its predecessor. However, much of the original is still present in the sequel. Both games have reinforcements, loadouts, and a galactic war map that controls where you can fight. Helldivers 2 also uses much of the same weaponry that was in the original, such as the Liberator, Scythe, Sickle, Defender, and Breaker. However, I found that the power scaling was actually better in the original than in 2. Now, both games use horizontal balancing, whereas most others use vertical. What this means is that to avoid newer weapons being better, each weapon is mostly the same, albeit with different strengths and weaknesses. What I found in Helldivers 1 is that most guns will erase enemies off the map with ease. The Sickle can one-tap fodder enemies, and deals with medium armor with ease. However, when fighting the cyborgs, I noticed that the swarms of damage sponge enemies caused me to struggle. The gun overheated in just a few shots, and I was forced to kite a mob of just a few enemies while I stopped to take shots. Whereas with a normal gun, I was able to mag dump them until they finally went down. I tried out the Breaker, which was the king of early Helldivers 2, and found that it could still chew through anything, but it wasn't as drastic as a difference compared to other weapons. Almost any gun can rip straight through the bugs and bots in Helldivers 1. Even the shields for the Illuminant don't require using laser weaponry, and can be destroyed with ballistics. However, the weapons in Helldivers 2 have a much worse level of balance. Helldivers 1 is seemingly balanced around the idea that if everything is OP, then nothing is, as each weapon can dish out loads of damage, even unupgraded. However, the guns in Helldivers 2 are hit or miss, and I mean literally miss. Most of the guns have a known bug where the scope is horribly misaligned and causes you to have to shoot from memory. This is particularly horrendous for the anti-material rifle, which needs 2 precision shots into a Hulk's eye to take it out. Good luck doing that when your government installed the scope by smashing it into the gun with a hammer. Other weapons just straight up suck. The Scythe, while having great range, does such piss-poor damage that I would equate it to exactly that: you are pissing on your enemies. The Scythe isn't even viable on bugs, as the weapon needs weak point spots to be efficient at killing, and all bugs can keep moving after you remove their head, and Their weak spots take less damage from anything that isn't explosive. The Adjudicator was my most hyped weapon for the new pass, but come to find out it kicks like a mule and does just as much damage as the stock Liberator. The only benefit is that it has medium pen ammo, which bounces from being worthless to life-saving. The way pen works in this game is that some enemies are covered in armor, and depending on the pen of your gun, it determines whether you do no damage or some damage to them. For instance, some bile spewers have armored heads that can't be destroyed with anything other than medium pen or higher guns. Other enemies have even heavier armor, and medium pen will ricochet off of them and possibly towards you. So, while medium pen is great for those particular situations where you need it to kill a specific enemy, it is trash in every other situation. This is because Helldivers 2 prescribes to the Tarkov balancing logic, and makes medium pen guns do worse damage than lower pen ones. Meaning that, against trash mobs like the warrior bugs or berserkers, you are actually worse off because medium pen will make no difference since they have no armor. Therefore, there's often no point in bringing a gun that does worse damage, has lower ammo capacity, and possibly more recoil when you can just bring the Liberator, Defender, or Breaker, and use stratagems on anything that you can't kill, especially when most of the support weapons are made for killing big targets. This is especially noticeable with the medium penetration variant of the Liberator. It has a smaller magazine than the stock Liberator, lower damage, and higher recoil. The only upside to the gun is that it has the medium penetration, which, again, is only helpful against a handful of bugs and bots. Looking back at Helldivers 1, it just makes no sense. Every gun was capable of tearing through enemies, albeit differently, and because each gun was so good, it meant that they all played to their strengths. The Sickle is the king of keeping topped up on ammo and dealing with trash mobs, but lacks the rate of fire to deal with bullet sponge enemies. The Breaker is good, but the low starting ammo and widespread means it can be really ammo inefficient depending on the situation. So, to see some guns in Helldivers 2 simply be terrible appears to me as intentional. I think the biggest problem is that medium armor is just not that common enough to warrant serious consideration. The automatons only have the Devastator, the Tank, and the Factory Strider as enemies that can be dealt more efficiently with medium penetration. The Terminids only have the Hive Guard and Bile Spewer, so sure, you can take lower stats across the board for your weapons, just to kill these few enemies, or you can just, I don't know, shoot around their armor? Or use the autocannon, EAT, flamethrower, laser cannon, arc thrower, grenade launcher, anti-material rifle, or quasar cannon. Then you get to keep a decent primary that is perfect for clearing the non-armored enemies, which will be 80% of what you're fighting. If harder difficulties introduce dynamically armored enemies, then I could see those weapons serving a purpose. Maybe impossible and higher difficulties could have Terminid warriors get armored heads, requiring you to have to shoot the limbs if you have a low pen weapon. Automatons could get the opposite, where default soldiers have better armor on their chest, requiring lower pen guns to need to land headshots. This way, lower pen guns aren't rendered useless, but rather medium pen guns have a better chance to shine, and not just collect dust in the back of the Super Destroyer. It really does strike me as odd to see such a drastic change in balancing between the two games. I was worried that my fully upgraded Sickle would be the only thing worth a damn in my higher level missions, but was surprised to see that every gun I brought out was viable. I didn't play with every weapon, so I could have very well missed the trash gun of Helldivers 1, but from a surface level, everything felt great. It's even more jarring to see that any gun that becomes remotely meta in Helldivers 2 is quickly taken out back and executed by firing squad. The railgun, which was the original premier call-in weapon, capable of destroying chargers with just a few shots, and could even take out a Bile Titan, was kneecapped in patch 01.000.100. They also dragged out the Breaker and Energy Shield backpack to face the wall as well. That vacuum later was filled by the Quasar Cannon, which was nerfed just yesterday as the time of writing. It wasn't a crazy nerf, just another 5 seconds to the recharge time, but it highlights the thought process behind Arrowhead's weapon balancing for this game. The more a weapon gets picked by divers, the higher a chance Arrowhead eyes the shotgun and leash. I don't think I'm crazy either, because there's weapons I would argue are even more overpowered that get passed over simply because no one takes them. The Stalwart is queen when it comes to mowing down legions of rank-and-file bugs and bots. Turn the fun switch on. I promise you'll never not bring it again.
The lawnmower.
Yet, I barely see anyone else take it in my games over heavy destroyer weapons like the autocannon, Quasar, or even EAT. Which is understandable, because without these weapons, you have to rely solely on stratagems to take out a Hulk or a Charger, and then are at the mercy of the intern aiming the Super Destroyer guns, who has to figure out which spec on the ground is the target, or you. However, that I think is the balance, the sacrifice you have to make. Someone who brings the Quasar should be able to mulch any heavy enemy they come across, because they are giving up amazing weapons like the Stalwart or the Buff Flamethrower to specifically target bigger enemies. And small enemies aren't a joke. Hunters are one of the worst enemies in the game, and they come at you in packs. This doesn't just extend to support weapons either. Most of the primary weapons are simply awful. The Breaker, which was amazing, got nerfed so hard that you spend more time reloading than firing. Then you have weapons like the Knight, which I literally just don't see get used, and for good reason. It's the only true SMG in the game, as the Defender is, for some reason, more akin to a bolter, whereas the Knight actually has a bullet hose RPM. Yet, the Knight has horrible damage, sky-high recoil, and the only benefit of it is that you can use it one-handed, which the Defender also lets you do. So in other words, there's no reason to use this gun, which can be said about a lot of them. Why use the Scythe when the Sickle exists? Why use the Diligence counter-sniper when the Diligence exists? Or actually use the best sniper in the game, which is a slug shotgun, which then proceeded to get nerfed. Some guns do fill really tight niches that work well. For instance, the plasma-firing Scorcher is one of the only weapons that has splash damage, allowing you to hit the driver of the Strider just by shooting the armored front side. The splash damage is also helpful for tight swarms of bugs, as it can hit multiple enemies with a single shot, but it's more geared for bots, as its high damage and low magazine make it excellent for precision shots. See, that right there is good balance. It's a weapon that you don't want to bring all the time, but is still reliable and has a quirk that makes you better suited for some enemies over others. Then, you have the Breaker Spray and Pray, which is the normal Breaker, but it has almost twice the ammo and half the damage. So you can use it for just the small bugs, or you could just bring the Liberator, the Defender, and kill the small bugs just as fast, while also having good damage for the bigger ones. While the balance for the weapons themselves needs some serious work, the balance around how they get used versus bots and bugs is amazing. For instance, when I first started playing, the anti-material rifle seemed like a joke. After all, why bring it for bugs who charge straight towards your position after the first shot? Against Chargers, it's useless because despite being an anti-material rifle, the Charger's plate is apparently a non-material, as any shots will bounce straight off of it. It's also useless against Bile Titans, and there's too many small bugs swarming you to use it against them. However, when bringing it against bots, it becomes one of the most vital weapons in the game. Tank attacking you? Shoot it in the vent. Tower cannon? The vent. Hulks? Believe it or not, the eye. Not only can it chew through some of the toughest enemies the automatons have, but it is also capable of mulching Devastators and anything else with a head. On the contrast, weapons like the machine gun or Stalwart are much better suited towards bugs, as most of them have no armor, and given how they just walk straight to you, you'll feel like a German who just got handed the MG42. Just not with the horrible ideology. Although, you'll probably still get overwhelmed and killed the same. This extends to all of the weapons in the game, as most weapons and stratagems are better suited for one side over the other. Of course, weapons like the Liberator will be fine for either, but you don't really want to bring a flamethrower for bots when you have to stand still in front of them while they line up their shots. It just sucks that many of the weapons simply aren't worth bringing for either side. This is probably my biggest critique with the game. I mean, the weapons are how you change your playstyle up. They're one of the only things that can make a mission feel different, and there's simply no point in using the majority of them, since 30% of them kick ass and the other 70% gets your ass kicked. I'm just really not a fan of the weapon balance. I haven't even gotten out of the comparison yet. Jesus, we gotta move along. So, while Helldivers 1 is the king of weapon balance, there were some things that made me wish I could go back to the sequel. Helldivers 2 introduced pod steering, whereas in Helldivers 1, the pod will drop in a random location near the marker, and you only have a small, circular shadow to warn you before it smashes you into the ground. The enemy account was also seemingly small for such high-intensity missions. Doing Helldive missions in Helldivers 1 was honestly easy compared to the same missions in Helldivers 2. In 2, it is not uncommon to have every inch of your screen covered in bugs or bots, and the reinforcements come quick. Whereas in Helldivers 1, we were rolling through enemies, literally, as the APC driver would barrel past waves of cyborgs to get to the objectives. It also showed that Helldivers 2 enemies are much more tenacious than the previous game, as Hulks will run you down to the end of the earth if it means they get the kill. Enemies in the first game, once off screen, seemingly vanish and don't reappear until you go back to engage them. So, it's a welcome change to see Helldivers 2 up the ante, as it helps drive home the idea that you are actually diving behind enemy lines and are completely surrounded. Helldivers 2 also introduces armor variation, allowing you to pick from light, medium, and heavy armor, which changes how much damage you can take versus how fast and nimble you are. Each armor also has a unique perk that, while beneficial, isn't game-changing. One armor will give you more stims, while another gives you more grenades. Speaking of which, stims were completely removed from Helldivers 1, and instead it used a COD-style regen health out of combat system. Personally, I think stims are a good new addition as it adds to the stress of resource management, and using combat drugs that probably give you cancer to stay alive fits the tone and world building of the game perfectly. However, there is something that I can't even say Helldivers 2 does better as much as the first one does wrong. That thing, you see it, right? Look at them. Desperate to escape, but nowhere to go. Forced to stay in that perfect little box. I don't know what Crackfiend at Arrowhead decided this way back when, but in Helldivers 1, the camera doesn't follow you, it follows the group. Meaning that whoever gets to the edge first gets to grab the reins and force everyone else to move along or get bulldozed by enemies off screen. I know this isn't a Helldivers 1 review, but I have to talk about this. I can understand if this was a local co-op game, but it's not. All these players are from around the world. I don't know them, but we're here, stuck in this box together. Good luck using the mech or the cars, cause if even one person decides not to hop in, you'll be spending the next 10 minutes smashing into the mandatory teamwork wall and wishing you were playing solo. I mean, when it works, it works. Just look at us cruise through this mission. Even the enemies are getting swallowed up by the camera. Look at their janky movements. I'm all for top-down games, but dear God, set me free. So, it goes to say that Helldivers 2 adding camera autonomy was a great choice. Well, I guess it depends on who you play with. Yes, I'm talking about you, diver who runs off to call extract before anyone else is nearby or ready. Being free from the box is a great choice, but there's still plenty more to go through. Helldivers 2 removes the down but not out mechanic from the original, which allowed you to revive your teammates when they got knocked down. Essentially, each Helldivers HP is divided in 3 sections, with the first half of your HP being your standing HP, and once that is depleted, you enter the COD Zombies crawl, where you can shoot your gun at nearby enemies, and getting hit further causes you to go to the last of your HP, where you can only slither away. Again, this is an odd choice to see removed. Granted, the implementation of the original is pretty jank, as reviving is as easy as running up and hitting E one time, but given the huge emphasis on teamwork that Helldivers 2 spent so long promoting, and given how there's medic armors in the game that seem like they were handcrafted just to let you revive people more efficiently, it's jarring to see medic armor just make your stims better and give you no team bonus. The obvious expansion would be to allow you to drag your teammates while they can shoot and allow you to save lives by sticking together and reviving. It would even add more incentives to use things like the shield generator or ballistic shield so that you can cover down teammates and help to get them back up. It's a huge missed opportunity, but one that doesn't impact the enjoyability of the game. Helldivers 2 also changes the difficulty drastically. Aside from the increased enemies, the time to kill is much, much higher than the original. Most enemies in Helldivers 1 could be killed in 1 or 3 shots, whereas most enemies in Helldivers 2 can take a quarter of a mag before going down. This isn't a bad thing, as it actually makes the enemies much scarier, and is used to balance the two factions. Standard bots can be killed with 1 bullet if it hits them in the head, whereas a bug's head can eat a lot of shots, and even with it removed, it will cause them to enter a berserk state while rapidly losing HP. This helps the Terminids have some much-needed terror factor, as in Helldivers 1 you could mow the generic ones down by the hundreds without any of them coming close to you. The other welcome change in difficulty is how missions have been changed. In Helldivers 1, you were forced to do every objective with no time limit, meaning you were on the planet for as long as it took to complete the mission. There is no Super Destroyer leaving orbit. You either get it all done, or you don't. Helldivers 2 keeps many of the objectives, but makes them optional, allowing for the player to choose how long they want to spend on each mission. You can bury Allen it and be done with a mission in under 10 minutes, or spend the full 40 minutes collecting every sample, completing every side objective, and following the orders of William Sherman as you teach the Xeno traders the meaning of scorched earth. However, there is something about the difficulty system that doesn't sit right with me, and I feel will only get worse as the game ages. To help illustrate my point, let's look at a game called Deep Rock Galactic. When you boil it down, both of these games are incredibly similar. Both are 4-player co-op games that use instance mission-style gameplay with multiple objectives, and have you working for an overbearing organization. However, one of the key differences is how each game factors in the player count. When you play a solo mission in Deep Rock, you aren't going to encounter nearly the same amount of enemies compared to if you play with a full squad of 4 players. More importantly, when playing by yourself, you're given a robot companion named Bosco, which is capable of mining faraway minerals, which are an important resource for the player. Bosco will also fight the bugs when they get close, and if you mark an enemy, Bosco will fire a high-powered missile. Bosco can also illuminate the caves when an area is marked, and Bosco can revive the player when they go down. The other thing that DRG does differently is that normally the game has no lives. Instead, as long as one player is still on their feet, the mission will continue, and fellow dwarves can be revived at any point. However, when playing solo, Bosco has a set number of revives, which basically act as lives for the player. Run out of them, and the mission fails. Now, you might be asking what any of this has to do with Helldivers 2. Let me explain. DRG completely reworked some of the key mechanics to make it playable and friendly for those that don't have anyone to play with, or that don't want to play with random strangers. DRG keeps the player company by incorporating a robot, which gives the lone player a sense of camaraderie. However, DRG also massively lowers the enemy count the less players there are, and lowers the damage the enemies do. The balance doesn't stop there either. These stats are only minorly increased when there are 2 players, since you will still be down in power significantly, as Bosco is pretty much worth at least 2 players. What I'm trying to hammer home is that DRG has factored in that not everyone will be in a full lobby, and made considerate balance changes to ensure that anyone, regardless of party size, will have a good time. On the flip side, there is Helldivers 2. Now, this should be taken with a grain of salt, as there isn't any hard math that supports this. I can't find any numbers for how the difficulty scaling works based on player count, but everything I have looked at, and experienced, suggests there is none. There are only 2 confirmed balance tweaks. The first is that patrols are reduced based on the amount of players. So a solo player will see 1/4 of the patrols that a full team of 4 will see. Secondly, and this is actually a nerf, is that lives are introduced based on the amount of players. A full team will have 20 lives, whereas a solo player will only have 4. Helldivers 2 right now is working perfectly, because this game is brand new and there are droves of players to fill lobbies. Once the servers got fixed, I did not, and have not, had any issues getting people to join my games. However, like all online games, the truth is that this will not last, and that's okay. A game doesn't need to be at 400,000 players all the time, and it often won't be. Player numbers fluctuating is a normal part of live service games. The problem then arises when the player numbers do actually dwindle, or if you don't have any friends to play with. Now, the argument can be made that you don't need to do the harder missions, but that is a bad excuse for a few reasons. Firstly, higher difficulties introduce new enemies, so a player who is forced to do only the easiest missions will be missing out on content. Secondly, the super samples, which are required to get most of the upgrades for the Super Destroyer, can only be found on difficulty 7 and above. There are only 9 difficulties in the game, so 7 is about as high as it can get. As much as I love this game, it works for me because I have great internet and have no problems playing with randoms. If you have spotty internet, get booted from matches a lot, or just don't like interacting with people, I honestly can't recommend this game to you. Looking at DRG, it's clear to see that changes could be made to make the game more suitable for solo players, and at some point it probably will require that once years have passed. Helldivers 2 already has models for drones, so they could introduce their own variant of Bosco, which automatically follows the player and doesn't take up a backpack slot. The game could also increase the number of reinforcements, since it is so easy to die that plowing through 4 lives can happen in a few minutes. The game with 4 players is great, but if for whatever reason the matchmaking fails, or you can't connect to anyone, then good luck doing any of the higher tier missions without avoiding all of the side objectives and rushing for extract. The other most notable change is the speed of the enemies and of the Helldiver. If you take the stamina perk in Helldivers 1, you won't be living a Flash allegory. You will actually become him. No enemy will be able to stay on top of you, and 10 minutes will look like a leisurely stroll. The Helldivers in 2 wish they had half the stamina the OG Helldivers had. You went from being the Spartan 2s to the Spartan 3s. Less cool, more dramatic, and with a death toll that calls into question how this government program is fundable. I think that's enough comparing and contrasting for now. There's still plenty of more differences, but this is a Helldivers 2 review, and while sequels should be critiqued from their series, they can still stand on their own. So, moving on, let's get into the first thing you'll see, the graphics. Now, depending on who you ask in the frame rate versus graphics debate, Each person is a different answer. Just looking at how pretty Helldivers 2 is makes my GPU want to cry. But that really can't be understated. Visually, this game is gorgeous. Not only are the textures of the armor and weapons done really well, but the cape crinkles and physics are great to look at, and the weapons themselves aren't just blocks of plastic. Just looking at the Liberator, you can see the barrel of the rifle through the holes, the end of the barrel as grooves for attaching muzzle devices, there's a cheek pad on the stock, and a fire selector with all the right info. So not only are the graphics great, but the detail is meticulous. I mean, it really didn't even need that level of gun porn, because this is a predominantly third-person game, and when you're aimed in, you're basically only seeing the scope. Yet, the first-person reload animations are just beneath Modern Warfare's, and that's a high bar. Your character will always try to keep their hand on the trigger while reloading, and you can even see spent mags lying around after you've chucked them. In fact, the first-person animations are so good that it makes me question why they didn't add a FPS mode in the first place. I mean, looking at most YouTube thumbnails, they all use the reload animations to get a cinematic screenshot. I'm all for a third-person shooter, and I'm sure there's more to it than just slapping on a FPS toggle, but it would be welcome. It would also help ease the jank that comes from having to snap into a scope zoom to hit a few precision shots when you're otherwise running around and shooting in third person. Another great visual detail is in the blood and viscera that spews from enemies when you kill them. Get knee-deep in bot blood? Your character will reflect that by being covered head to toe in crimson. Alternatively, if you're wading through bug guts, you'll be covered in splashes of green, yellow, and orange. This won't just go away either. Finish a mission and your diver is coming back disgusting. It's a great way to show who lived and got dirty and who didn't. However, it does seem wildly inconsistent, as the majority of the time I never have a speck on me, but randomly I'll notice that I'm absolutely caked in other missions. Still, it's a great visual indicator that you haven't died in a while, although it can ruin the fashion. However, the environment is what really takes the cake for me, as you'll walk through lightning storms, blizzards, fire tornadoes, and meteor showers. This is great both for the player and for the gameplay. Visually, it helps break up the otherwise monotonous rocky landscapes that make up the majority of the worlds, and from a gameplay perspective, it helps change the way you play a mission. When the fog gets dense or a blizzard kicks in, you won't see the bots, just the laser fire and rockets smashing into your body. The only warning you might get is their red eyes glowing in the distance once they detect you. Bugs can use the obscured environment to get right on top of you without you hearing them. The effects themselves are really well done as the lightning arcs through the sky and creates a soft glow on the ground before disappearing. The fire always looks gamey and has that lower texture resolution to it, but that could be because I'm not running the game at max settings. For reference, I run the game at 2K and use a 2060 Super and get anywhere from 40 to 50 frames depending on what is happening. Although, I play on the balanced graphics setting and have a lot of the options turned down, so your game could look better depending on your hardware. The most notable issue I have is that many of the textures can look fuzzy at times, but I've experienced this in games like Modern Warfare and Dead Space, which make generous use out of the DLSS features, so again, take what you're seeing with a grain of salt. The only bug I've seen is with the lighting is, just look at the amount of bloom these lights give off. Someone cranked the Michael Bay knob. Performance-wise, the game is good. I expected from the trailers that this game would run at sub 30 frames, and am shocked to see stable frame rates even when the enemies are coming in waves and all sorts of VFX is popping off from the explosions. There's never been a time in all my hours that I've looked at the screen and said, this is unplayable. Now, that doesn't mean it's great. 60 frames is a dream for me in this game, as most times I'm never hitting that. But again, I'm fairly certain that's tied to my hardware and not the game's performance. Even with the graphics up, it's not running nearly as bad as some other games. Aside from the lighting and environments, the enemy designs are really well done. Each Terminid is visually distinct and quickly informs the player about their armored spots and what they'll be doing. See a bug covered in green? It's going to spit acid at you and slow you. See a plated up bug? It's armored and you'll need rockets. The only visually odd choice is to give the Bile Spewer, Bile Titan, and Nursing Spewers giant shoot-me sacks. In any other game that would be the obvious weak point, and yet in this game, it's the opposite. Shooting the sacks with anything other than an explosive causes the damage to be reduced by half, so you instead want to shoot them straight in the head. Visually, this is counterintuitive, as again, red barrels mean shoot for big explosion, and big glowy part always means weak spot. What makes it more confusing is that the player isn't rewarded for shooting the spewer's backsack, but is rewarded for destroying the glowing undercarriage of the Bile Titan, as it will prevent it from doing its Wish Godzilla breath. On the other hand, the automatons are more muddied visually, but don't suffer from the Terminid's conflicted design. This meaning that many of the bots look identical, but do completely different attacks. However, at least this time around you always know where the weak points are. For instance, the typical Trooper bot has 5 different subclasses that pretty much look the same. The most striking is the Jet Troopers, who will lift off to drop right on top of you, but aside from their jetpack, they look the exact same as the other rank-and-file soldiers. Where it becomes more deadly is the difference between a normal Trooper and one of the elite red ones, who fire far faster with their machine guns. Picking off a normal Trooper versus one of them can be the difference between getting vented or not. Then you have the Devastators, who, much like the Troopers, come in different flavors. Visually, they are almost identical, with the main difference being Rocket Devastators have mounted rocket pods and the Heavy Devastators have a massive shield and a machine laser. Usually, you won't need to see them, because much like the homeless guy outside of Walmart, he'll unload on you before you've noticed. So, while visually they can be harder to tell apart, gameplay-wise, you know exactly what to shoot for. Their shiny white heads are the obvious weak spot, but firing at the Devastator's rocket pods will blow them up, and shooting at the big power packs on their back will cause an instant death. This also extends to the larger enemies, as the Hulk has a glowing shoot-me target on their backs, but their glowing LED eye is also susceptible to anti-material rifle rounds, or just a rocket. The audio is next up, and honestly there isn't much to say about it. Take a listen.
Pelican 1, landing in progress.
Democracy prevails once more.
What you'll notice is a lot of what is probably brass and strings, I'm not a music expert, mixed with just a hint of a beat and some electronic noise. Now, tonally, I think the music is amazing. It's as generic and over-the-top patriotic as the lore of the game is. However, for the player, it's really boring to hear over and over again. The only time that the music kicked in and I got excited was my very first mission when the Hellpod music starts playing as you crash down to the planet. However, the extraction music doesn't make me feel like I need to get there. I'm a pretty big fan of game OSTs. There's many games that I have gone and searched up the music because of how good it is. In fact, some of those are so similar to Helldivers that it seems odd they went for such a neutral score. Take the Darktide soundtrack. Jesper Kid went nuts when he designed that. Listen to this track from Deep Rock Galactic. Again, the music works tonally for the game, but not for the player. Even the trailer for the game used a remix of Canned Heat's Let's Work Together. Then you look at how many TikTok edits of the game use either Fortunate Son or a interesting version of Bubblegum Bitch by Marina and the Diamonds, and it becomes more obvious that the music could be more than it is. Hell, dynamically using music could help highlight the gameplay itself. Down to your last life fighting the bots and feel like you're about to lose? Now your ears get hit with a remix version of the Automaton chant, and the music becomes progressively more EDM to highlight their victory. On the other hand, curb stomping a mission and finishing it with nearly no losses could bring the Helldivers theme front and center. They could incorporate more guitar or add some rock and roll style songs to mimic the Vietnam era use of Fortunate Son, or the Gulf War era use of For Whom the Bell Tolls. Music has always played a part in war, and there's a great improvement that could be made to Helldivers 2's soundtrack. Again, for what it is, it's serviceable. It just isn't defining or fun to listen to. With visuals and audio out of the way, we can jump into gameplay. So aside from the weapon balancing being, well, not very good, how is the balance of Helldivers 2? Honestly, it's a lot better than the weapons. Many of the enemies have been toned down since the game came out. You used to see anywhere from 3 to 6 chargers on your screen when fighting bugs, and oops, all Bile Titans was a common flavor. Now, even when I play on Helldive, I only see about a maximum of 3 Bile Titans or chargers, and now with even more stratagems to use like the Quasar Cannon or Mech, it has become a lot easier to deal with them. The other good balance point is that difficulties never raise the HP or damage of enemies. What you get on Trivial is exactly what you'll be getting on Helldive. This means that new divers don't have to prepare to cycle out all of their weapons out of fear that they've been getting accustomed to a trash gun, and they aren't suddenly about to enter Payday 2 difficulty. No, rather than that, the only thing that changes is the amount of missions required to complete a set, and the amount of side objectives that can appear. For instance, doing a trivial mission will just have one step like raising a flag, whereas a Helldive will have you destroy a bug nest, or take out a bot command post, and then also give you the option of turning SAM sites online, clearing out 10 different bug holes or factories, and getting artillery online. Of course, enemy spawns are drastically increased, and harder enemies will appear. For instance, Bile Titans won't spawn on easier difficulties, and when they do appear in the medium difficulties, they are the whole objective, not just an obstacle. Yet, when you get to the upper echelons of difficulty, they'll be as common as chargers. This also applies for the bot equivalent, such as Hulks or Factory Striders. Each time you complete a mission, you contribute slightly to the war effort for that planet, and the good news is that difficulty does not affect this, meaning that even if you aren't capable of finishing missions on the hardest difficulties, you can still help everyone else by just playing the game. The game still does push you into playing on the final 3 difficulties, as that is the only way to collect the last type of sample needed for ship upgrades. These aren't necessary, and only help make your stratagems even better, but you really don't need them to complete the easier missions. The armor balance is also very good, as taking heavy armor, especially with the perk that reduces explosive damage, can be the difference between eating 1 rocket and dying, and getting ragdolled across the ground, breaking your legs, but living. Of course, the drawback is that being so heavy means you'll be sucking wind for the majority of the missions as your diver struggles to run with 200 pounds of destroyer plate taped to them. This means that hulks will always catch up to you quickly and bugs will be taking bites out of your ass, but it'll take them a while to chew through you. On the flip side, taking light or medium armor can speed you up a great deal and allow you to recover stamina faster, but you'll die in 2 to 3 less hits than if you wore heavy armor. The upside of these lighter armors is that for some reason, heavy armors are almost always stuck with the recoil reducing perk, meaning that light and medium armors have more options such as getting extra grenades for destroying bug holes or bot factories, or they can take more stims to stay alive, as well as increase how long the stims heal you for. This would be the time to segue into something relevant and horrible, but I really don't want to cover that yet. In fact, I don't think the Cult of Positivity wants that talked about. So, to hold that off, stratagems are the last up on the balance tree, and honestly, sit in the middle ground between weapons and armor. There's very clearly better stratagems than others, but the good news is that there's a lot more usable stratagems than there are rotting ones. For instance, nearly every Eagle stratagem is worth taking, especially when you have the ship upgrades that help the Eagle pilot by removing more of her limbs. You won't feel bad once you see how many extra uses you get out of her. The stock airstrike is amazing at both taking out clusters of enemies and big targets, and is capable of closing bug holes and blowing up factories. Because of how long the line of the bomb drop is, it means that depending on how you can line it up, you can destroy 3 or more spawn points with one use. The 500 kilogram bomb is one of the later unlocks and is probably the most memed, and well, it's alright. Despite looking like a giant nuke that would destroy anything near it, it only does damage in a very small circle around the missile. I've also had situations where I use it straight on a Bile Titan and it just walks away. Maybe I'm getting the discount missiles that are stuffed with packing peanuts, I don't know. But this is how most of the stratagems feel. You have stellar guns like the Stalwart or Quasar Cannon, and then you get the subpar weapons like the Heavy Machine Gun or Arc Thrower. The Eagle also has its share of bad stratagems such as the Smoke Strike or Rocket Pods. The smoke really only hides you from the bots, and again, why take the ability to hide from them when you could just bring the normal airstrike and turn them into scrap? The rocket pods miss too much for me to consider them, and at that point I'd rather just bring a rocket launcher and do it myself. The orbital stratagems are much more devastating, but suffer from having to wait around for them to actually hit. The Orbital Precision Strike is a starting stratagem, and it is good for completing certain objectives. For instance, it can blow up the Rogue Research Lab side objective, which is quicker than using a Hell Bomb, and it is also capable of taking down stratagem jammers, detector towers, and even the harder command bunkers. Its destructive power is far greater than anything the Eagle can offer, but it simply isn't practical in the majority of cases that a diver will find themselves in. The strike takes so long to come down that any target will have moved out of the small blast radius by the time it hits. Then it takes 100 seconds to be reused. Alternatively, the Eagle airstrike has 2 uses stock and 3 uses with upgrades, and the Eagle fighter itself rearms every 150 seconds. So you get a slightly longer cooldown time, but get double or triple uses. And the Eagle airstrike comes in much faster than the Orbital Strike. Now, there are really good orbital options, such as the Orbital Laser, which automatically sweeps across the map and takes out anything in a massive radius from where it was called in. It's capable of taking down everything from Bile Titans and Hulks to lesser grunts. However, it's balanced around a high cooldown and only having 3 uses per mission. There's also the Orbital Barrage, which are the premier method for taking out bug hole clusters or factory production centers. Of course, this assumes that the shells are hitting where you want them to. I'm not going to sit here and go through every type of stratagem. There's still backpacks, turrets, emplacements, and exosuits to use. Again, it's not that any one stratagem is useless, it's just that much like the weapons, there's some stratagems that simply aren't worth bringing. I can count on one hand the amount of times I've seen someone bring the Orbital Gas Strike, or the Shield Generator Relay. It becomes harder to willingly gimp yourself when some missions have a modifier that only allows you to bring in 3 stratagems instead of 4, meaning that you have to be even more selective. So, while the fun of calling down an airstrike on a group of clustered enemies never wanes, it does leave you longing for a new type of viable way to get the same results. Well, I've covered visuals, audio, bouncing across the board, and everything else. Surely I'm not forgetting anything. Surely there's nothing else to touch on. There couldn't quite possibly be some kind of controversial topic that's just around the corner waiting to jump me in an alley. Microtransactions. They're in every game now that wants to be a live service, and, well, for good reason. Now that DLC has been shit-canned to keep player bases together, every company has tried new ways of getting money to keep their game updated and filled with new content. Helldivers 2 and even 1 was no different. Helldivers 1 sold small DLC packs for $2.99 that included some stratagems and weapons, as well as a new suit of armor. Helldivers 2, on the other hand, sells much larger packs called War Bonds, which include 3 new primaries, 1 secondary, a new grenade, 3 armor sets, a booster, and a collection of other cosmetics such as emotes, banners, as well as 300 premium currency. Each war bond costs 1,000 super credits, which equates to 10 USD. On top of that, Helldivers 2 also sells new armors and helmets outside of the war bonds in the superstore. The armors cost $250, and helmets cost $125. This equates to $5 for a helmet and armor. The other thing that Helldivers 2 does is allow you to collect the premium currency by playing the missions. Super credits can be found in bunkers and locked vaults, or in blinking containers. Typically, the credits are found in quantities of 10, but you can very rarely find a pack of 100. The low cost of the armor and the fact that the war bonds never go away, coupled with the ability to get currency in-game, has Reddit in a frenzy. You would think that Arrowhead themselves blew up EA and destroyed the concept of microtransactions. Looking at it objectively, the prices for the armors are very low. Most games charge 10 or more for a skin, such as Fortnite or League of Legends. Being able to grind the currency also means that you won't have to fork over the exact amount, and can, through copious hours of playing, get things for free. However, it really isn't all that it is chalked up to be, and this should be the most concerning thing for would-be buyers. Helldivers 2 already costs $40 to play. It is not free, and most likely never will be. Buying the stock game gives you no access to any of the war bonds aside from the starter one, which is much larger than the paid ones. Currently, the only way to unlock new weapons and new boosters is to buy the $10 war bonds. The only thing that has never been included in a war bond so far are the stratagems, which periodically get released in updates. The thing is, this system still isn't friendly for players. Sure, because of horizontal weapon balancing, you will never be at a disadvantage, but you will never be able to play with any fun new toys either. The horizontal weapon balancing is also a slippery slope, as when the cutting-edge warbond was introduced, the laser-firing sickle became the best new weapon. It had 6 magazines, and did around the same damage as the Liberator. Because it was an energy weapon, it meant that you could allow the gun to cool down and have unlimited ammo, so long as you didn't overheat the gun. Now, the gun has been nerfed to only have 3 magazines, but still, it shows that it doesn't take much for a warbond weapon to be better than anything a non-paying player will have. These warbonds are also planned to come out every single month, meaning that you'll be looking at paying a MMO subscription if you want to keep up with all the new content. It will also mean that newer players will be looking at paying a huge chunk of change if they want to access all of the content. If you buy the game right now for $40, and collect all of the currency available in the first free war bond, you will have 750 super credits. This will mean that you will need to buy an additional 250 credits to purchase a single war bond. Getting the lowest amount of currency possible for that transaction means buying 2 150 super credit packs, which equates to $4. Then you'll get 300 credits back when you finish the war bond you choose to buy, meaning you'll need an additional 700 credits, which the cheapest you can get that for is buying the $10 pack and keeping the additional 300 credits. Sure, that will mean the next war bond will be cheaper, because you'll have 600 credits this time around, but it still shows the endless cycle of needing to buy more and more premium currency to unlock not just cosmetic content, but actual new weapons. The armors themselves aren't even just cosmetic, as each armor has a unique perk. For instance, the Cutting Edge War Bond has the only armor in the game that has the perk Electrical Conduit, which gives a 95% resistance to arc damage. As of right now, that perk is almost useless, as the only thing that does arc damage are other Helldivers. But again, this assumes that an enemy that does such damage will never be introduced. All it takes is a few nudges for this game to become pay to win, and it can be argued it's already there. Personally, I don't like any game that puts actual game-changing elements such as weapons or maps behind DLC, as it locks the non-paying players out of core features. Cosmetics are fine, because they're exactly that, cosmetic. And yes, I know there's going to be people who argue that, actually, you can grind the premium currency, so you'll never have to pay, ever. Yes, technically you can do that, but not at a feasible rate. Unless you are playing for the sole intention of looking for currency, then intentionally leaving early. I don't have data, but having played for so long, I don't find them that often. Even if you found a pack of 10 every single mission, it would still require you to play 100 missions to get one war bond. Assuming each mission you do is 20 minutes long, that means you would need 33 hours of non-stop playtime to get 1,000 credits. So, yes, you can earn currency, but it will never be enough to actually offset the sheer amount you are going to need, especially as the game goes on. Now, I'm not going to tell anyone what to do with their money. God knows I've spent countless dollars on League and Fortnite skins, so I'm probably more of a sucker than anyone watching this. However, it does hurt to see a game that costs $40 have so much paid content. I absolutely believe that live service games need additional cash flow, because after all, that additional funding won't last years. However, I wouldn't exactly say this format is more consumer friendly than others. Yes, the war bonds will never go away, but buying them still means you have to grind out all of the content rather than have it immediately unlocked like in Helldivers 1. And, because the war bonds are so stuffed, it means you might be paying a lot just to use one or two things you really wanted. For instance, I desperately want to use the sickle in-game, but have resorted to stealing it off the bodies of others because I have no desire to fork over $10 for 3 sets of armor I won't wear and 3 other guns I'll never touch. Again, Arrowhead isn't wrong to get into aggressive MTX. After all, they've been pumping out new content like crazy with how many enemies and missions they've introduced since the game came out, but I feel that the right way for them to do it would be to add far more customization to the armor and only sell those. Make the perks swappable so that there's no gameplay elements being sold, and there you go. People can pay for something that has no impact on the game, and the new weapons can still be locked behind medals to keep people playing. So, all in all, is the game worth buying? I would still say absolutely. I mean, I wouldn't have taken the time to write up an almost 10,000 word review if I didn't have a great time playing it. Those 143 hours weren't played out of sheer anger. In fact, I expected a game that looks this good and plays so well to have costed 60. Sure, the weapon balance isn't great and the MTX is waiting to greet you at the front door, but that doesn't invalidate everything that the game does well. For $40, you can easily get your time worth without spending an additional cent. It's also an amazing game to play with friends, as potential for team killing and overwhelming odds make it a phenomenal party game. I mean, I got the majority of my hours in the first month of release before any new content was ever added. Yes, the game absolutely deserves the hype, and Arrowhead has done an amazing job giving post-launch support. But, like all games, it shouldn't be put on a pedestal as it still has its own issues. This isn't a game I would say to wait for a sale on. However, if you don't have people to play with, and or your internet is spotty, then I would say hold off, as the solo play simply is not viable for a fun time. Otherwise, you're definitely getting your money worth. It's safe to say that Helldivers 2 is a great game, and it only came out 3 months ago. There's no doubt that with more updates, the game is only going to improve. And, well, for those of you that have watched all the way to this point, I want to extend my sincerest thanks. I've never reviewed a game before or ever created a video, so I'm hoping this was at least mildly entertaining and hopefully informative. If you enjoyed it or disagreed with me the entire time, then feel free to leave a comment, because I really do want feedback on what worked and what didn't. Again, thank you all for watching, and maybe another video sometime in the future.